The sunlight streamed through the thin curtains, leaving golden rectangles on the oak floor. I sat in my favorite chair, poring over old photographs. In one of them, Percy, my late husband, had his arm around my shoulders. We were standing in front of our first house in Newcastle, small, humble, but so dear. I still remember the smell of fresh paint and the feeling of a lifetime ahead. Now I'm 73, and most of that life is behind me. Percy has been gone for 8 years. Sometimes I still wake up at night and reach for his side of the bed. The emptiness. He left suddenly, a heart attack during a morning jog. We didn't even get a chance to say goodbye. I set the photos aside and glanced at the clock. It was 10:30. Oliver had promised to stop by for breakfast. My only son had always been a little unpunctual, but I loved him with all my heart. Even now that he was in his 40s, I still saw him as that little boy with the broken knees who believed his mom could fix anything in the world. The kettle on the stove began to whistle quietly. I stood up, feeling the familiar ache in my knee, a reminder of the years I'd spent behind a desk. 40 years in the accounting department of a large construction company. 40 years of numbers and reports and financial plans. But I never complained. The job provided Percy and I with a comfortable life and allowed us to put aside a decent amount of money for our old age. I learned how to invest wisely back in the 80s when many of my colleagues thought it was a waste of time. A woman should be in the home, not stocks, my boss used to say. But Percy backed me up. Violet Thornbridge never follows other people's rules, he liked to say. And he was right. The sound of a car pulling up brought me out of my reverie. Oliver, 20 minutes late as usual. I fixed my hair in front of the mirror in the hallway. The gray had almost completely displaced my natural blonde color, but I refused to dye it. Every silver hair is a story, my mother used to say, and I agreed. Mom! Oliver came in without knocking, like he always did. He was tall, with a bushy brown head of hair that looked just like his father when he was young. He was followed by Imogen, his wife of the last 15 years, and the children, Hugh, 14, and Edith, 12. I hope we're not too late. Imogen kissed my cheek, leaving a trace of lipstick. The traffic was terrible. I nodded silently. There couldn't have been any traffic. I'd checked the traffic online before they arrived. A small lie, one of many. I'd learned long ago not to point them out. Grandma, do you have anything to eat? Hugh walked straight into the kitchen without even saying hello. I'm starving. There's a bacon pie in the refrigerator, I replied, watching as my grandson unceremoniously opened the door and pulled out the dish I'd been preparing all morning. Imogen, meanwhile, was already seated in the living room with her feet up on my antique coffee table. She was leafing through the glossy magazine she'd brought with her. Violet, you wouldn't believe the prices on Gucci bags these days, she exclaimed, not taking her eyes off the page. It's a daylight robbery. Really? I mumbled, setting out the teacups. Mom, could you take a look at my laptop? Oliver pulled a computer out of his bag. It was slow. Oliver, I'm an accountant, not a computer wizard. I sighed. But you've always been good with technology. He turned on the laptop and set it in front of me. Just take a look. See if you notice anything. I suppressed the urge to remind him that he was a programmer himself and should know better than I did. Instead, I sat down at my desk and started checking the settings. Oh, by the way, Mom, Oliver said casually, pouring himself a cup of tea. Could you lend me some money? It's nothing serious, just a few thousand. We're a little overdrawn this month. I looked up from the screen. What is it this time? The usual expenses, he shrugged. House, car, bills, you know how it is. I knew. And I also knew that their normal expenses included a membership to a high-end golf club for Oliver and spa treatments for Imogen. Not to mention private tennis lessons for the kids and a new closet every season. I'll see what I can do, I replied, though something inside clenched. It wasn't the first time she'd asked me that, and I was sure it wouldn't be the last. You're the best, Mom. Oliver leaned over and kissed my forehead. I'll pay you back next month, I promise. We both knew that wasn't going to happen. After a breakfast that was more like a looting, Hugh managed to eat half the pie and Edith spilled juice on my new tablecloth. Imogen suddenly remembered the purpose of their visit. Violet, we wanted to invite you to our country club for the weekend. She smiled her trademark smile that she saved for special occasions. It's going to be so much fun. Buffet, spa, pool, and it'll cost, I started. It's nothing. She dismissed it. It's only 2,000 for the weekend for all of us, but you wouldn't deny us a little family vacation, would you? I looked at Oliver. He was avoiding my gaze, studying the pattern on the cup. I need to think about it, I said. I had plans for the weekend. What plans? Imogen snorted. Sitting around watching old movies? You need to get out into the world, Violet. At your age, socialization is very important. At my age. Those words always came out of her mouth like a sentence. Grandma, you're coming with us, aren't you? Edith asked me, paying attention to me for the first time during the visit. She sat staring at her cell phone. Mom said you'd pay for new swimsuits for Hugh and me. I blinked, startled by my granddaughter's bluntness. Imogen quickly intervened. Edith, we agreed not to talk about this now. Her tone was light, but her eyes were lightening. But you told Papa yourself yesterday that grandmother wouldn't say no because she had nothing else to spend her money on. Edith shrugged. You said she'd leave us all her savings soon, so why not spend some of it now? There was a heavy silence in the room. Imogen turned pale, and Oliver coughed and rose awkwardly. We should probably get going, he said, avoiding my gaze. Thanks for breakfast, Mom. Yes, thank you, Violet. Imogen grabbed her purse. Think of the weekend, will you? Edith, Hugh, pack up. They left as suddenly as they had come, leaving behind crumbs on the floor, dirty dishes, and a heavy feeling in my chest. I slowly cleared the table, pondering my granddaughter's words. Is this what they say about me behind my back? An old woman with nothing to spend her money on. An ATM with an expiration date. In the evening, I sat in my chair going over my bank statements for the past year. The amounts given to Oliver and his family added up to an impressive figure. Private school for the kids, help with the mortgage, temporary loans that were never paid back, vacations I'd been invited on just to pay the bills. I looked at Percy's picture on the mantelpiece. What would you do if you were me? I asked him mentally. He'd always been kinder than me, always willing to give the last shirt off his back. But even he would notice that something wrong was going on. My phone vibrated. A message from Oliver. Mom, don't forget the money, okay? We need to pay for our club membership by Friday. Love you. Not a word about the awkward breakfast scene. No apology. No thanks for anything I'd already done. I put the phone away without answering. A plan was maturing in my head. It was time to teach my family a lesson about the value of money and respect. And maybe it was time to start living for myself instead of them. I picked up Percy's picture and whispered, I hope you understand. A week passed after the awkward breakfast. I deliberately didn't call Oliver, expecting him to take the initiative and perhaps apologize for his family's behavior, in vain. The only text message I received was a reminder of the money I had supposedly promised. Tuesday morning started with a drizzle, typical of Newcastle at this time of year. I made myself a cup of strong tea and sat by the window with a book. The dampness made my joints ache, but I'd long ago learned to live with the discomfort. Percy always joked that I could predict the weather more accurately than meteorologists. Just wake up and gauge the level of pain in my knees. A phone call interrupted my reading. Imogen's name popped up on the screen. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the conversation. Good morning, Violet. Her voice sounded honeyed, which was always a bad sign. I hope I didn't wake you? I've been getting up at 6 in the morning for 50 years, Imogen, I replied dryly. What can I do for you? Oh, Violet, I'm having a disaster. There was a dramatic note in her voice. Hugh and Edith's school has just announced that they're raising tuition next semester. Can you imagine? 20%. It's a ripoff. I remained silent, waiting for the rest of the story, even though I knew where it was going. So Oliver and I were thinking, maybe you could help us. After all, this is your grandchildren's future. You always said education was the best investment. How much? I asked you briefly. Well, if you round it up, about 20,000 for both of them for a semester. She said it as if it were a small thing. But you don't want them to go to public school, do you? It's a very different population, Violet. And the level of teaching isn't the same. I remembered my own public schooling, working during the day and studying accountancy at night, and how Percy and I had saved every penny so that Oliver could get a good education. I'll think about it, I answered at last. We need to know by the end of the week, Imogen added quickly. And one more little question. Did you remember about the money for Oliver? He mentioned talking to you. No, I haven't. I tried to control my voice. But I have expenses too, Imogen. I don't print money in my basement. Of course you are, she laughed nervously. It's just that we were counting on your help a little. You know how hard finances are these days. I knew that their idea of financial difficulty included having to choose between a new car and a vacation in the Maldives. Tell Oliver I'd like to talk to him, I said. Alone. Oh, she sounded wary. Okay, I'll tell him. But you'll think about school, won't you? I ended the conversation feeling a mixture of irritation and fatigue. When did my relationship with my son turn into endless requests for money? Where is that little boy who used to bring me wildflowers and draw me birthday cards? In the evening, the doorbell rang. Oliver stood on the doorstep, drenched from the rain and with a guilty smile. Hi, Mom. He leaned over and kissed me on the cheek. Imogen said you wanted to talk? I let him in and offered him a towel. Tea? I asked, heading for the kitchen. Unless you have something stronger. He rubbed his hands together. It's been a terrible day. Trouble at work, traffic, and now this downpour. I pulled out the bottle of whiskey I kept for occasional guests. Percy liked to have a drink or two in the evening, but I hardly ever drank. What's the trouble at work? I asked, pouring him a drink. Oh, the same old stuff, he said with a wave of his hand. Bosses demanding the impossible, co-workers screwing me over. You know how it is. I did. 40 years in one place had taught me all about office intrigue. But I also knew that Oliver often exaggerated his difficulties at work to gain sympathy, especially when he was going to ask for money. Oliver, we need to have a serious talk. I sat down across from him at the kitchen table. About money. He tensed momentarily, but then relaxed and smiled. Sure, Mom, I was just about to tell you I'll pay you back that loan next month. It's just a little tight right now. It's not about paying it back, I interrupted him. Even though we both know that's not going to happen, it's about it becoming a pattern. What do you mean? He frowned. Imogene called this morning, asked for $20,000 for the kids' school. Oh, that. He sipped his whiskey. Yes, it's an unpleasant situation. They've raised the fees quite suddenly, but it's for the kids, Mom. You want them to have the best, don't you? What do you want, Oliver? I looked at him carefully. Do you want your children to grow up thinking that money falls from the sky? That they'll never learn the value of hard work and independence? He set the glass on the table with a loud clatter. Are you implying that I'm a bad father? No. I shook my head. I'm saying that you and Imogene are teaching your children a lifestyle you can't maintain without my help, and that worries me. God, Mom. Oliver leaned back in his chair. Can't you just help me without lecturing me? Don't you feel sorry for me? You have money. It's not about pity, Oliver. I tried to speak calmly, even though my insides were churning. It's about respect. It's about how you treat me and my money. We treat you with the utmost respect. He was outraged. We invite you to family events all the time, call you, visit you, and every time you ask for money, I finished for him. We looked at each other across the table. I could see the emotions changing on his face. Anger, resentment, confusion. Finally, he sighed and rubbed his face with his hands. Look, Mom, I understand your concern. His tone became conciliatory. Maybe we did abuse your kindness a little. But you know how hard it is these days. Prices going up, no paychecks. You have a good job, Oliver, I reminded him. And so does Imogene. You could live within your means. But that would be a whole different standard of living. He almost exclaimed it. Not what we're used to. Not what you're used to with my money, I added quietly. Oliver stood up and started pacing around the kitchen. You know what? Let's not talk about this right now. He poured himself another shot of whiskey without asking permission. We're both worked up. We'll talk some other time, okay? I realized that the conversation had failed. He didn't hear me, didn't want to hear me. He probably never would. Okay, I agreed, feeling tired. Another time. He finished his whiskey and smiled as if remembering something pleasant. By the way, I have a surprise for you. His tone changed completely, light, almost playful. Imogene and I have decided to have a family dinner this Friday, at the Amethyst. I raised my eyebrows. The Amethyst was one of Newcastle's most expensive restaurants with Michelin stars and prices to match. What's the occasion? I asked cautiously. Special occasion, he winked. Surprise. Just show up at 7, okay? It'll be us, the kids, and a couple other friends. Oliver, I'm not sure. Please, Mom. He took my hands in his. It's important to us. For me. Looking into his eyes, I saw again that little boy who so desperately wanted my approval. And despite all my doubts, I couldn't refuse him. All right, I gave in. I'll come. That's wonderful, he glowed. And wear something dressy, okay? There's a dress code. He kissed me quickly on the cheek and headed for the door, suddenly in a hurry. I almost forgot. He turned around at the door. I'm thinking of buying a new car. Nothing fancy, just a BMW of the latest model. The old one's worn out. I opened my mouth to remind him that his old car was only 3 years old, but he had already closed the door behind him. Standing in the hallway, I could hear his engine start, his tires rustling on the wet pavement. A strange sense of foreboding swept over me. A family dinner at an expensive restaurant. A special occasion. A surprise. Somehow I had a feeling this surprise would turn out to be unpleasant, especially for my bank account. I returned to the kitchen and noticed that Oliver hadn't even cleaned up his whiskey glass. A small but telling detail. He always expected someone else to clean up after him, whether it was me, Imogen, or the waiter at the restaurant. I rinsed out the glass and set it on the shelf. Then I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app. In my account was a sum that would provide a comfortable old age for many people, the result of decades of hard work, prudent savings, and smart investments. Oliver knew about those funds. Imogen probably did too, and they considered them theirs not now, but in the future. Their behavior made it clear. Why did the old lady need so much money? She'd be leaving it to us soon anyway. I closed the app and took a deep breath. Friday. Amethyst, 7 o'clock. Whatever my family had planned, I would be ready. Friday came all too quickly. I spent the morning going through my closet looking for the right outfit for the evening. I'd rarely had an occasion to go out in recent years, and most of my dresses were clearly out of style. Finally, I settled on a dark blue long-sleeved dress I'd bought for a friend's funeral last year. Not the most festive option, but elegant enough for Amethyst. 2 hours before the appointed time, I hailed a cab. Oliver offered to pick me up, but I opted to drive myself. Years had taught me the value of being able to leave whenever I wanted, without being dependent on someone else's schedule. As the cabbie drove me through the evening Newcastle, I looked out the window at the city. Window lights, people rushing about, young couples holding hands. Percy loved moments like this. Observing life from the outside, speculating about random passers-by. Look, Violet, he'd say. That woman in red, I bet she's an opera singer. And we'd make up whole stories about strangers, laughing at our fiction. The cab stopped at the restaurant at exactly 6:50. I paid and got out, adjusting my shawl around my shoulders. The Amethyst was housed in an old Victorian mansion with tall windows and massive mahogany doors. There was a uniformed doorman at the entrance who bowed to me and opened the door. Inside, everything screamed luxury. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, waiters in white gloves. A world I'd never belonged to, nor aspired to belong to. Percy called such places temples of ostentatious consumption. Good evening, the receptionist greeted me with a perfect smile. Did you make a reservation? I'm expected. The reservation is under the name Thornbridge. She looked at the list and nodded. Yes, your family's already here. Let me show you out. I followed her through the hall, noticing the glances of some of the visitors. A woman my age in a morning gown wasn't the most common sight in a dressed-up crowd. But I didn't care. At 73, you don't worry so much about the opinions of strangers. Our table was in the far corner of the room, partially hidden by a decorative screen. I saw Oliver, Imogen, and the children. Next to them sat 2 strangers, a well-dressed, middle-aged couple. Mom! Oliver stood up when he saw me. At last! We were beginning to worry. I'm right on time, I argued, glancing at my watch. Yes, of course. He kissed me on the cheek. This is Roland and Tabitha Lorimer, our good friends and potential business partners. I shook hands with the strangers who smiled politely, but there was a slight confusion in their eyes, as if they hadn't expected to see me here either. It's nice to meet you, Tabitha said in her American accent. Oliver and Imogen have told me so much about you. Really? I raised an eyebrow, sitting down in the chair they'd offered me. Not too much, I hope. Imogen laughed nervously and threw a warning glance at Oliver. Violet's just kidding, she turned to the children. Hugh, Edith, say hello to your grandmother. The grandchildren mumbled greetings, keeping their phones on. I didn't take offense. This attitude had become the norm. The waiter came over to take the drink order. Oliver ordered a bottle of Dom Perignon champagne. Are we celebrating something special? I asked, though I was already growing anxious inside. You'll find out soon enough, Oliver winked. Let's order first, and then we'll get to the big news of the evening. The menu had no prices, a sure sign that the restaurant was prohibitively expensive. I chose the most modest salad and fish course, while the others ordered foie gras, truffles, and other delicacies. Violet, you must try the lobster, Tabitha advised. The food here is divine. Before I could answer, Imogen intervened. Of course she'll have the lobster. And some oysters for an appetizer. Violet loves seafood, don't you, dear? I didn't love seafood. In fact, I was mildly allergic to shellfish. Oliver knew that, but he remained silent, smiling and sipping his champagne. I think I'll stick to my choice, I said firmly. Oh, don't be modest, Tabitha insisted. In a place like this, it's a sin not to indulge. Imogen leaned toward the children. Order whatever you want, darlings. Grandma's treating them tonight. I froze, feeling the blood rush to my cheeks. I'm sorry, what? Imogen smiled at me with feigned innocence. Oh, it was supposed to be a surprise. Oliver said you insisted on paying for tonight's dinner in honor of the special occasion. I shifted my gaze to my son. He was scrutinizing the menu, avoiding my eyes. Oliver? My voice was quiet but firm. He finally looked up and smiled guiltily. I wanted to surprise you, Mom. You're always so generous to us, and I thought... What did you think? I interrupted. That you could handle my money without my knowledge? An awkward silence descended on the table. Roland cleared his throat and pretended to be very interested in the drawing on the tablecloth. Please don't make a scene, Imogen hissed, leaning toward me. Not in front of the kids or the guests. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. Maybe I really was exaggerating. After all, what was one dinner compared to everything I'd given them over the years? Oliver, sensing my hesitation, quickly changed the subject. Roland, tell your mother about your real estate projects. It's very interesting. For the next 20 minutes, Roland ranted about the luxury housing market in Newcastle, the up-and-coming neighborhoods and investment opportunities. I listened, half listening, trying to figure out where it was all going. When the appetizers arrived, Imogen raised her glass. I propose a toast, she announced, to our new life. Everyone raised their glasses, including the children, who for some reason were also poured champagne. I raised mine slowly, still trying to figure out what was going on. To our new life, Imogen repeated and turned to me with a bright smile. To our new home. That was it. I set the glass down without taking a sip. New home? Yes, Mom, Oliver interjected, smiling broadly. Imogen and I found the perfect house in Gateshead. You know, that new upscale neighborhood overlooking the river? 5 bedrooms, garden, swimming pool. And for only £1,200,000, Imogen added. Practically nothing for a neighborhood like this. I stared at them in silence, trying to comprehend the scale of their impudence. And you expect me to help with the down payment? Oliver finished. Only $250,000. We'll mortgage the rest. We've chosen a house in a good neighborhood, Imogen added, so that you can move in with us when it's hard for you to live alone. When I'm too old and infirm, you mean? Don't twist things around, Mom. Oliver looked annoyed. We're thinking about your future. Our future together. And that's why you invited the realtors over for family dinner? I nodded toward Roland and Tabitha, who now looked frankly awkward. Actually, Roland cleared his throat, we're the agents selling this particular house. And we're here today to answer any questions and maybe sign some preliminary documents. So here's the deal. They planned the whole thing. Corner me, surround me with people I'm uncomfortable saying no to, and force me to agree to this crazy idea. I'm not signing any papers, I said firmly, and I hadn't agreed to pay the down payment. But Mom, Oliver began, his voice pleading, we've already paid the deposit, £5,000, non-refundable. And whose money was that? I asked, already knowing the answer. Yours, he mumbled. But you always said you wanted us to live in a nice house, that the kids would have room to grow. I never said anything like that, I countered. And I certainly didn't authorize the use of my money for collateral. At that moment, the waiter brought the main course, a procession of expensive dishes that filled the table. The kids pulled themselves away from their phones and stared greedily at the food. Let's put this conversation aside and enjoy our dinner, Imogene suggested with a strained smile. Edith, Hugh, take your pick. Hugh reached for the lobster, and Edith grabbed a plate of truffle risotto. Both piled on portions they couldn't possibly eat. Imogene winked at them and uttered a phrase that turned the evening around. Grandma is our ATM. Husband, children, choose whatever you want from the menu. Laughter erupted around the table. Even Roland and Tabitha couldn't hold back their smiles, though they tried to hide them. Oliver looked slightly embarrassed, but did nothing to stop or correct his wife. I sat frozen, feeling something inside me finally break. ATM. That's what I'd been to them all these years. Not a mother, not a grandmother, not even a person with her own feelings and desires, just a source of money. Grandma, can you buy me a new iPhone? Hugh asked with his mouth full. Everyone in the class already has one. And I need new sneakers, Edith added. The ones with the sparkles. Imogen laughed. Kids, finish your food first. Grandma's ATM isn't going anywhere. That was the last straw. I carefully placed the napkin on the table and stood up. Excuse me, I have to go to the bathroom, I said in a steady voice. Of course, dear. Imogen didn't even look up from her foie gras. Just don't be long, the desserts will be here soon. I ordered the whole menu. I grabbed my purse and slowly headed across the hall. But instead of turning toward the restrooms, I continued straight ahead, toward the exit. The receptionist smiled at me. Leaving already? Yes, I replied. It had been informative evening. Once outside, I took a deep breath of the cool evening air. The trembling in my hands slowly subsided. What had I just done? Left my family at a restaurant with an unpaid bill that I was sure would amount to an astronomical sum? That was completely unlike me. Violet Thornbridge, always rational, always responsible, always willing to put the needs of others before my own. But today, I was a different Violet, one who had finally seen the truth and found the strength to say no. I stopped a passing cab and gave my address. As I settled into the back seat, I imagined the look on Oliver and Imogen's faces when they realized I wasn't coming back. When the waiter brought the bill for $15,000 or more, suddenly I felt a strange relief. It was as if the heavy weight I'd been carrying for years had finally fallen from my shoulders. On the way home, I mentally thanked Percy for teaching me how to be strong. Never let people overstep your boundaries, Violet, he often said. Even if it's family. Especially if it's family. Today, I finally took his advice. When I got home, I made myself a cup of strong tea and settled into a chair, waiting for the inevitable. The phone rang exactly 42 minutes after I'd left the restaurant, enough time for them to finish their meal and realize I wasn't coming back. Oliver's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered it. Mom, where the hell are you? His voice shook with barely contained rage. At home, I replied calmly, drinking tea. There was a pause, as if he couldn't believe my answer. Did you just left? I left us with an unpaid bill for $15,000? Yes. Do you have any idea the position you put us in? His voice was rising with every word. Roland and Tabitha think we're some kind of crooks. Imogen is hysterical. The children are frightened. I don't think the children are frightened, Oliver, I said. More like annoyed that their evening was ruined. I can't believe you did this, he said, almost shouting. We called 3 banks trying to withdraw cash. I had to pawn my watch until we could settle the payment. The watch I gave you for your 40th birthday? I asked, feeling a prick of regret. That watch was really expensive, engraved by Percy and me. Yes, the very same one, he spat out. And all because of your prank. What's gotten into you? I sipped my tea, collecting my thoughts. Tell me, Oliver, when was the last time you came to me without asking for money? When were you interested in my life and not in the state of my bank account? What are you talking about? He seemed genuinely confused. We visit you all the time. And every time you leave with a check or a promise of financial assistance, I finished for him. Your wife called me an ATM, Oliver, ATM. It was a joke, Mom. Imogene just made a bad joke. No, it wasn't a joke. I felt a lump rise in my throat. It was the truth. That's how you see me. As a source of money, nothing more. There were muffled voices in the phone, like Imogene was saying something to Oliver. Then he spoke to me again, in a more subdued tone. Look, Mom, I'm sorry if we hurt you. I really am. But what you did was unforgivable. You embarrassed us in front of important people, and now we're in serious financial trouble. Which you created, I reminded you. I didn't ask you to order everything on the menu, and I certainly didn't authorize you to use my money to put a mortgage on the house. So you're not going to help us? His tone became threatening. Even after all these years? After everything we've done for you? What exactly have you done for me, Oliver? He fell silent, clearly unprepared for the question. We're your family, he finally said. We visit you, we call you, because you need something, I finished for him. Not out of love or concern. It's not fair, his voice shook. You know I love you. I want to believe that, Oliver, I said quietly, but your actions say otherwise. There was some fumbling, and then Imogene's shrill voice came through. How could you, Violet? She sobbed so loudly that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. You ruined everything. The Rolands are gone. They don't want anything to do with us anymore. We lost the dream house. We lost the mortgage. And now this monstrous bill. Imogen, I interrupted her tirade. You and Oliver are adults with good jobs. You're perfectly capable of living within your means if you try. You're just jealous, she shouted. Jealous that we're young and can enjoy life while you sit alone in your old house. I sighed. The conversation was useless. I have to go, Imogen. Tell Oliver I won't be paying this bill or any other bill for the foreseeable future. You'll regret it, she hissed before hanging up. I put the phone away and closed my eyes. It hurt, sure, but along with the pain came a strange sense of freedom, like I'd finally thrown off the invisible chains I'd let myself put on. The next 2 days passed in silence. No calls, no messages. I did housework, read books I'd put off for a long time, and for the first time in a long time, I felt calm. On the third day, the doorbell rang. Hugh and Edith, my grandchildren, stood on the threshold, both with unusually serious faces. Grandmother, may I come in? Hugh asked, shuffling from foot to foot. I stepped back silently, letting them inside. They walked into the living room and sat awkwardly on the couch, 2 teenagers, clearly running errands for someone else. Do your parents know you're here? I asked, sitting down across from them. Hugh shook his head. They're still mad. Dad said things. I can imagine. I smiled weakly. Would you like some tea? Or maybe some hot chocolate? No, thank you. Edith finally looked up from the floor. We came to apologize. Mom said you left us with an unpaid bill because you're greedy and don't like us. I flinched at those words, but didn't interrupt. But then I remembered that my mom called you ATM, she continued. And it wasn't nice. Yes, it was rude, Hugh agreed. And it wasn't true. You're not an ATM, you're our grandmother. I felt tears coming to my eyes. Thank you for coming, I said quietly. It means a lot to me. We didn't want you to think we thought you were either, you know. Hugh shrugged awkwardly. Though we probably weren't behaving very well. We're used to you always helping out, Edith added. Mom and Dad talk about your money so often that it's become sort of normal. I looked at them carefully. The children had grown up in an atmosphere of material excess and were used to getting everything they wanted. But unlike their parents, they didn't seem to have completely lost their ability to reflect. I love you both, I said. I always will. But you need to understand that money doesn't just fall out of the sky. I've worked my whole life to ensure a comfortable old age. We know, Hugh nodded. Dad told me you were an accountant, and that you got up at 6 in the morning every day, even at weekends, Edith added, and that Grandpa always said you were the smartest with money. I smiled, touched that Oliver was telling the kids something about me besides my financial solvency. Your grandfather was a very kind man, I said. He'd be proud of you now. Wouldn't he? Edith looked surprised. Even after we behaved, Well, like spoiled children. Realizing your mistakes is followed by correction. I shrugged slightly. You're here, and that's the first step. We talked for about an hour. For the first time in a long time, I was really getting to know my grandchildren, their interests, their dreams, their fears. It turned out that Hugh was interested in astronomy and dreamed of having his own telescope. And Edith wrote poems and stories, but was shy about showing them to her parents for fear of Imogene's ridicule. When they were about to leave, I gave them some money for a cab. Just for a cab, I said sternly. Not for new games or candy. They nodded gravely, and for the first time I believed they had a chance to grow up better than their parents. After the grandchildren left, I sat in silence for a long time, thinking about my life and my decisions. I always wanted Oliver to have everything I didn't have growing up. Maybe that was my mistake. I gave too much without asking for anything in return, without setting boundaries. The next morning, I called my old friend Anthony Pratt, who was a lawyer. We hadn't seen each other in years, but we emailed occasionally. "Violet!" he exclaimed when he heard my voice. "What a pleasant surprise! How are you?" "Better than one would expect," I answered honestly. "But I need your professional help, Anthony. I want to change my will." A short pause followed. "Of course," his tone became more businesslike. "When would it be convenient for you to meet?" "The sooner the better," I said. "I have some ideas I'd like to discuss." We arranged to meet the next day. Before I went to bed, I went over my current will, made 5 years ago, shortly after Percy's death. It was very simple. Oliver would get the house and most of the money, and the grandchildren would receive a separate amount for their education. I could see now that it was a mistake. If they had gotten it all at once, Oliver and Imogen would probably have spent it on luxurious trinkets and ostentatious lifestyles, leaving nothing for the children's future. In the morning, I put on my best suit, a dark gray, austere, the same one I'd worn for the last 10 years before I retired. It made me feel as confident and organized as I had when I was negotiating with company directors and auditors. Anthony's office was in an old building in the center of town. His secretary, a young woman with a neat lock of hair, showed me into the office where my old friend was waiting for me. Anthony hadn't changed much over the years, still as trim, with attentive eyes and impeccable manners. Only his wrinkles and his hair had turned gray. "Violet," he rose to meet me. "You look beautiful." "Liar," I grinned, shaking his hand. "But polite lying is half your profession, isn't it?" He laughed and motioned for me to sit down. "So," he folded his hands on the table, "you want to change the will. May I ask what prompted this decision?" I told him everything: the years of financial mismanagement, the unfortunate dinner, my sudden departure from the restaurant. He listened without interrupting, only nodding or frowning occasionally. "I see," he said when I was done. "What are you planning now?" "First, I want to set up a trust fund for my grandchildren," I said firmly. The money would not be available to them until they were 25 and only for education, buying their first home, or starting their own business. Anthony nodded, making notes. "Reasonable. What about Oliver?" "He'll get a house," I said after a pause, "and a small amount of money. The rest," I took a deep breath, "the rest I want to divide among a few charities. The ones that support the elderly who live alone, and educational programs for underprivileged children." "Are you sure?" Anthony looked at me carefully. "Oliver would probably contest a will like that." "Let him try," I shrugged. "I'm of sound mind. It's my decision." We spent several hours discussing details and drafting documents. Anthony was thorough and thoughtful, looking at every possible legal loophole Oliver could exploit. When I signed all the papers, I felt strangely relieved, like I'd finished an important job I'd been putting off for too long. "You know, Violet," Anthony said as he walked me to the door, "Percy would be proud of you right now." "Do you think so?" I paused. "Even after I left my own son with an unpaid bill at a restaurant?" "Especially after that," Anthony smiled. "He always said you had a rod of steel in you. It just took something really serious to bring it out." I smiled, remembering how Percy had often called me my quiet rebel. He saw something in me that I didn't always notice myself. Walking out of Anthony's office, I felt in complete control of my life for the first time in years. I was no longer an ATM machine or an endless source of financial support. I was Violet Thornbridge, a woman with her own opinions, her own will, and her own future. and that future now belonged to me alone. It had been a week since my visit with Anthony, and in that time I hadn't received a single call from Oliver or Imogen. The silence was both unsettling and peaceful. I knew they'd show up sooner or later, but I was enjoying a calm I hadn't experienced in a long time. Friday morning was surprisingly sunny. I opened the windows, letting in the fresh air and the sounds of the neighborhood waking up. The thought that had been on my mind for days was, what now? My whole life had been centered around work and, after retirement, my family. Now that one was over and the other had collapsed, I found myself at a crossroads. At breakfast, I unfolded the local paper I'd been a subscriber to for 30 years, despite Oliver's jokes about my old-fashionedness. My eye caught the small ad in the corner of the page. Palette Art Studio. Painting courses for beginners. New group starts next Tuesday at 10 in the morning. All materials provided. I wondered. I'd loved to paint when I was young, but then school, work, and family had all pushed the hobby to the back burner. Percy often said I had a talent, especially for watercolor. He kept my student sketch of a spring park above his desk until the day he died. Without thinking any longer, I dialed the number listed in the ad. The female voice on the other end of the line cheerfully greeted me and confirmed that there were still seats available. Wonderful, I exclaimed, surprised at my own enthusiasm. Then sign me up. Name? The woman asked. Violet Thornbridge, I answered, feeling strangely excited, as if I were introducing myself on a first date rather than enrolling in an art class. Very good, Mrs. Thornbridge. We're expecting you on Tuesday. Nothing special, just come in comfortable clothes. As I hung up the phone, I felt energized. For the first time in a long time, I had done something purely for myself, without regard to the needs and expectations of others. It was liberating. In a burst of inspiration, I decided to go through the old closet that held Percy's belongings and my youthful drawing supplies. Among the boxes of papers and photo albums, I found an old wooden box. Inside were dried watercolor paints, a few brushes with cracked handles, and a sketchbook with sketches from almost 50 years ago. I sat on the floor, flipping through the fragile pages. Parks, Newcastle buildings, portraits of random passers-by, and lots of drawings of Percy, sleeping, reading, laughing. Looking at those sketches took me back to a time when we were young and hopeful. The ringing of the doorbell interrupted my memories. A messenger stood on the doorstep with a bouquet of flowers. Violet Thornbridge? He asked. These are for you. I accepted a luxurious bouquet of white lilies, my favorite flowers. There was a card attached to it. Mom, I'm sorry for everything. Let's talk. Love, Oliver. Here we go, I thought. The flowers were the first step in an elaborate strategy. Oliver had always known that lilies were my favorite. That fact, at least, he remembered. I put the bouquet in the vase, but put the card in my desk drawer. I wasn't ready to talk to my son right now, especially knowing that his apology would probably be followed by another request for money. Tuesday came faster than I expected. I put on a simple blouse and pants that I wouldn't mind getting paint on and headed to the art studio, located in an old converted warehouse near the center of town. The inside was brighter than the exterior of the building would suggest. Large windows under the ceiling let in plenty of natural light. There were easels along the walls, and in the center of the room was a large table littered with various art supplies. You must be Violet. An energetic woman in her 60s with short gray hair and bright turquoise glasses approached me. I'm Doris, your teacher. I'm glad you decided to join us. I shook her hand, feeling slightly embarrassed. The other participants, already seated at their easels, looked at me curiously. There were 10 of them, ranging in age from a young girl barely in her 20s to an older man who looked even older than me. Don't worry, Doris smiled, noticing my nervousness. Everyone here is new. Well, except Henry, she nodded toward the older man. But he attends every class I take, so he's part of the inventory. Henry laughed good-naturedly, waving a hand at me in greeting. 40 years as an accountant, and now I'm finally doing what I've always wanted to do, he said. Though Doris says I'm hopeless. Only with perspective, Henry, Doris countered. Otherwise, you're making progress. I smiled, feeling a strange kinship with the man. Perhaps all retired accountants are destined to turn to the arts. Doris showed me to a vacant easel next to Henry and a middle-aged woman who introduced herself as Maeve. Is this your first time too? Maeve asked, while Doris handed out materials. I nodded. I'd always wanted to paint, but never had the time. It's a familiar story, she smiled. I'm a nurse, just retired on a partial pension. My husband says I'm too young to stay at home, but too old to keep working 12 hours a day. A wise man, your husband, Henry remarked, winking. The first class was spent learning the basic principles of composition and watercolor. Doris was an excellent teacher patient, but demanding. By the end of 3 hours, I had a simple but recognizable still life with apples. Not bad for your first time. Doris looked at my work appraisingly. You have a sense of color, Violet. Let's develop it. I felt a strange surge of pride. It had been a long time since anyone had praised me for anything other than my generosity to my family. After the class, Henry invited everyone to continue socializing at the cafe across the street. To my surprise, almost everyone agreed, including me. Over a cup of tea and cakes, the conversation flowed casually. No one asked about my financial situation. No one hinted at possible help. We just talked about art, about the city, about books we'd read recently. Violet, you should join our book club, Maeve suggested. We meet once a month and discuss what we've read. It's nothing too serious, but more of an excuse to get together and chat. I'll think about it, I said, though I inwardly agreed. These people, complete strangers to me a few hours ago, seemed more sincere than my own family had been in years. Coming home, I felt different, as if some part of me that had been asleep for so long had begun to awaken. Even the colors around me seemed brighter, the sounds clearer. I spotted a familiar car outside my house. Oliver was waiting for me, leaning against the hood. When he saw me, he straightened up and tried to smile. Mom. He took a step toward me. It's finally here. I've been waiting for an hour. You could have called, I said, pulling out my keys. I was in class. Class? He looked genuinely surprised. What class? Painting, I answered briefly, opening the door. Do you want to come in? He nodded and followed me in. He looked around the house as if he were here for the first time, even though he'd grown up here. How are you? He finally asked. Good. I put my bag on the table. Really good. And you? He sighed and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that always made him look nervous. Honestly? Not really. That restaurant bill. We barely scraped by. We had to take out a loan. And the Rolands, of course, don't want to do business with us anymore. I'm sorry, I said, though I wasn't really sorry. Mom, I came to apologize. He sat down on the couch, looking up at me. Imogen and I talked it over and realized we were wrong, especially her, with that ATM joke. It was inappropriate. Inappropriate, I repeated, pondering my word choice. Not cruel, not humiliating, just inappropriate, like it might be inappropriate to wear white shoes after Labor Day. Yeah, and we want to make it right, Oliver continued. What do you say we have a family dinner? This Saturday, at our house. Just you, me, Imogen, and the kids. No strangers. It's been so long since we've just been together as a family. I looked at him closely. And what's going to be at this dinner, Oliver? Another announcement about the house you want to buy with my money? Or maybe a new car? He blushed and lowered his eyes. No, nothing like that. Just lunch. We miss you. We do? I raised an eyebrow. Or do you miss my checkbook? Mom? He looked genuinely hurt. Do you really think we love you just because of money? I remained silent, looking at my son. The silence dragged on, becoming an answer in itself. God, he finally exhaled. You really think that? Am I wrong? I asked quietly. When was the last time you took an interest in my life, Oliver? Do you know what I read, what I'm into? Did you ever ask me if I was happy? Of course he stammered, clearly going over our recent conversations in his mind and not finding anywhere he'd asked such questions. I just assumed you'd tell me if something was wrong. How could I tell? I shook my head. Every visit you made turned into a request for money. Every call ended with a reminder that you needed something. I'd become a function to you, not a person. Oliver looked confused, like he was seeing the situation from my side for the first time. But then his face regained the look of determination I knew so well. He came up with a new strategy. That's why we need to spend more time together, he said. A fresh start. Imogene is already planning the menu for Saturday. She wants to make your favorite beef pie. My favorite pie was chicken and mushroom, but I didn't bother to correct her. I'll think about it, was all I said. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to rest. It had been a busy day. He looked disappointed but got up and headed for the door. Call us when you decide, okay? We'd really like to see you. After he left, I sat in silence for a long time. There was something about this visit that made me uneasy. Oliver had been too insistent, trying too hard to look remorseful. It wasn't like him. The next morning, as I was watering the flowers on the porch, my neighbor Eleanor Brooks approached me. We'd lived next door for 30 years, but we'd never been particularly close, just said hello over the fence and occasionally exchanged news. Good morning, Violet, she said. Beautiful weather, isn't it? Really nice, I agreed. How are your roses? They were magnificent last year. This year the aphids have taken over, she said with a wave of her hand. By the way, I saw your son yesterday. Has he been visiting you much lately? Something in her tone made me wary. Not particularly, I answered cautiously. Why? Eleanor lowered her voice, though there was no one else around. Just, I was in Martha's Cafe last week, you know, that new one on the corner of Clarendon Street. And I overheard your son talking to his wife. I waited in silence for the rest of the conversation. They were sitting at the next table and didn't see me at the paper. They were talking. About you, Violet. About convincing you to sell the house and move in with them. The woman, I assume it was your sister-in-law, was saying something about the old lady finally breaking down and that now you have to go soft to get the house. I felt the blood drain from my face. Are you sure it was them? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Absolutely, Eleanor nodded. Your son called the woman Imogen, and she called him Oliver, and they mentioned your name several times. I understand, I tried to remain calm. Thank you for telling me. I wondered for a long time if I should get involved, Eleanor admitted. But then I decided I wanted to know if it was about my house. They were talking about how to corner you? I think that's how your sister-in-law put it. Something about how you can't say no if they play their cards right. That's it. Now Oliver's visit and his insistent invitation to dinner made sense. New strategy, new approach, but the same old goal of getting my money and my assets. Thank you again, Eleanor. I smiled weakly. I appreciate your concern. She nodded and after a brief hesitation added, You know, Violet, my son can also sometimes be insistent in financial matters. It seems to be a disease of our generation to raise children who regard our savings as their inheritance while we are still alive. I looked at her with renewed interest. Maybe Eleanor and I had more in common than I thought. Would you like to come over for tea sometime? I suddenly suggested it. We could, talk. I'd love to, she smiled. Maybe Friday? Friday would be fine, I agreed. When I got back to the house, I called Oliver right away and left a message on his answering machine. Hey, it's Mom. I'm sorry I can't make it for Saturday lunch. I have other plans. Maybe some other time. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange calmness. Now that I knew their true intentions, it was easier for me to resist manipulation. They wanted my house? Well, they would have to wait. And by the time it was theirs, I'd make sure it was the only thing they'd get. I pulled out the sketchbook I'd started filling after the first class and opened a blank page. Maybe I should draw my house, capture it as it had been for me all these years. Not an investment or an asset, but a home full of memories and love. I began to make the first sketches, feeling the tension leave me with each stroke of the pencil. The more I reflected on the situation, the clearer it became. Half measures were no longer working. Every time I tried to draw boundaries with gentleness and understanding, Oliver and Imogen found a way around them. It was time for decisive action. After much deliberation, I decided to call a family meeting not at their house, where they could control the situation, and not at a restaurant, where the presence of outsiders might inhibit our conversation. In my house, on my property. I called Oliver early Saturday morning, knowing that Imogen was usually still asleep at that time. Mom? His voice sounded sleepy. Is something wrong? No, nothing urgent. I answered calmly. But I'd like you all to come to my house for lunch tomorrow. I have some important news I want to share. News? There was a wary tone in his voice. What kind of news? Are you well? Perfectly healthy, I assured him. Just some changes in my life that I needed to talk about in person. Would 1C be okay? There was a pause, during which I was sure he was frantically trying to figure out what I was up to. Of course, Mom, he said at last. We'll be there. Should I bring anything? Just myself, I answered. And a good mood. After the call, I began to prepare. Not that I was planning a lavish dinner, more of a symbolic gesture. Herb chicken that I could make with my eyes closed, a simple salad, homemade bread, and apple pie. Not because it's Oliver's favorite dessert, although it is, but because it always made me feel at home and cozy. While the chicken cooked in the oven, I pulled out the folder of papers Anthony had prepared for me. Everything was in there: my new will, the paperwork to set up a trust fund for my grandchildren, and most importantly, a detailed list of charities to which I plan to donate most of my money. I did thorough research, choosing foundations that truly help the elderly and disadvantaged children. Not just throwing money at a problem, but looking for organizations with transparent reporting and proven effectiveness. Anthony warned me that Oliver would probably try to contest the will, but we took all the necessary precautions. I underwent an independent medical examination to confirm my capacity, and all the paperwork was legally flawless. Sunday came with the inevitability of the tide. The doorbell rang at exactly 1 o'clock. My family has always been known for punctuality when it comes to free food. Grandma! Edith hugged me first, and I noticed a sincere warmth in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. Hello, dear, I hugged her back. How are you doing at school? Fine, she shrugged. I've started writing for the school newspaper. It's interesting. It is. I was genuinely surprised. You never mentioned it. No one really asked, she said quietly. And in those words, I heard the echo of my own life. Hugh came in next, mumbling a greeting and heading straight for the table. Behind him came Oliver and Imogen, she with a strained smile and a bouquet that must have been bought on the way over. Mom, you look beautiful. Oliver kissed my cheek. And it smells delicious. Your famous chicken? Yes, I answered briefly, accepting the bouquet from Imogen. Come in, it's ready. The dinner passed in a strange atmosphere of strained gaiety. Imogen spoke too loudly and laughed too often. Oliver glanced at me questioningly, obviously trying to guess what I was up to. Hugh was concentrating on the food, and Edith, to my surprise, was watching all of us intently, as if gathering material for a newspaper article. When the main course was finished and I began to pour the tea, Oliver couldn't take it anymore. So, Mom, you were talking about some news? I put the kettle on and looked around at my family. Here they were, the people I was connected to by blood and years of life. The people who called me ATM and discussed behind my back how to get my house. Yes, there are a few things I wanted to talk about. I sat down at the head of the table. First, I changed my will. There was silence. Oliver froze with his cup halfway to his mouth. Imogen tensed, and Hugh looked away from his plate for the first time all lunch. Changed her will? Oliver asked, trying to speak casually. What do you mean? Literally, I pulled out the folder I'd put beside me. I made some significant changes to the distribution of my estate. But why? Imogen couldn't hide the concern in her voice. Was there something wrong with the old will? Yes, there was, I answered bluntly. It didn't reflect my current wishes and values. And what are your current desires? Oliver asked cautiously. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. I've set up a trust fund for Hugh and Edith, I began. They'll have access to the funds when they reach the age of 25 and only for education, buying their first home, or starting their own business. Not for designer handbags or golf club memberships. Imogen blushed slightly, but remained silent. Edith straightened, clearly interested, and Hugh frowned. The house will be yours, Oliver, I continued. As an only child, that seemed fair. He relaxed visibly, though his eyes were still wary. And as for my financial savings, I paused, looking at their tense faces. Most of it will be donated to charity. What? Imogen couldn't hold back a gasp. What charities? Organizations that help elderly people living alone and children from low-income families, I explained calmly. I left a list. All of them are vetted and have excellent reputations. But, Oliver looked like he'd been punched. I mean, you can't just, I can, I said firmly. And I already have. The papers are signed and legally flawless. My lawyer took care of it. Lawyer? Oliver interjected. You went to a lawyer behind our backs? Yes, just as you were discussing the sale of my house behind my back, I parried. Speaking of which, I know about your plan to convince me to sell the house and move in with you. Oliver turned pale and Imogen was suddenly very busy with her cup. Mom, I don't know who told you this, but it's absolutely not. Please don't lie. I held up my hand. I have a reliable source, and besides, your actions speak for themselves. The sudden remorse, the dinner invitations, the talk about how much we miss each other. That's because we do miss each other, Imogen exclaimed. We're your family. Family doesn't call each other ATMs, I cut her off. A family doesn't look for ways to swindle assets from their elderly relatives. A family loves and respects each other. There was a heavy silence. Hugh stared at his plate, clearly uncomfortable. Edith looked at me with wide-open eyes that showed something like admiration. There's something else, I continued after a pause. I have decided to travel. Travel? Oliver looked confused. Where to? To Italy, for starters, I answered. Percy and I have always wanted to see Venice, then perhaps France, Spain. I have a list of places I'd like to visit while I still can. But Mother, you've never traveled before, Oliver objected. You're 73 years old. You can't just… That's exactly why I have to do it now, I interrupted him. I still can, as long as my health allows it. And what are you going to live on? Imogen intervened. If you give all the money to charities? I said most of it, not all of it, I clarified. I'll have more than enough left over to live comfortably and travel. I've always been good with numbers, mind you. You can't be serious, Oliver shook his head. Is this some kind of revenge for that dinner at the restaurant? For Imogen's bad joke? No, Oliver. I looked him straight in the eye. This isn't revenge. This is my life. It's mine. Not yours, not Imogen's, not the kids. It's mine. And I've decided to finally live it for me. But we always thought, he hesitated, that you'd get all my money? I finished it for him. That you could continue your lavish lifestyle at my expense even after I was dead? I'm afraid you'll have to reconsider your plans. Imogen stood up suddenly, clenching her fists. You selfish old woman, she blurted out. After all we've done for you, after all these years of visiting you, calling you, including you in family events. And all the while taking, I finished calmly. Money, checks, gifts. You were only interested in my time and attention when it came with financial help. That's not true, Imogen was almost shouting. Oliver, tell her it's not true. But Oliver remained silent with his head down. For perhaps the first time in his life, he saw the situation for what it really was, without convenient excuses or self-deception. I think we had better go, he said at last in a muffled voice. Edith, Hugh, pack up. I'm staying, Edith said suddenly. I want to talk to Granny. What? Imogen stared at her daughter. You're not going anywhere. I'll stay for a while and then I'll take the bus back, the girl said firmly. I'm old enough to ride on my own. Imogen looked like she was going to object, but Oliver put his hand on her shoulder. All right, he said. Just don't stay out too late. Hugh, let's go. Hugh, who had been silent all this time, suddenly looked at me with undisguised anger. You've ruined everything, he said. We could have had a normal family, and you've ruined it with your selfishness. Hugh! Oliver shouted at him, but the boy was already heading for the door. Imogen followed him without saying a word or looking back. Oliver lingered on the threshold. Mother, he began. I don't know what to say. Then perhaps it's best not to say anything, I replied. At least not yet. Give yourself time to think. Really think, Oliver. He nodded and went out, closing the door behind him. When Edith and I were alone, she helped me clear the table. We worked in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, not tense. Grandma, she finally said when we sat down in the living room, I want you to know. I think you did the right thing. Do you? I looked at my granddaughter carefully. Even though it means less money for you in the future, money isn't the most important thing, she shrugged. At least it shouldn't be. And then, she faltered, I saw the way they treated you. It wasn't fair. Thank you, darling. I squeezed her hand. It means a lot to me. I'm writing a story, she said suddenly, for a school competition. It's about a woman who spent her life doing what others expected of her, and then decided to live for herself. I smiled, feeling tears come to my eyes. That sounded familiar. Can I show you when I'm done? There was hope in her eyes. My mom says writing is a waste of time, but I really love doing it. Sure, I nodded. I'd really like to read it, and you know what? Maybe you could come visit me in Italy on vacation. See Venice, Rome, Florence. Can you imagine how many stories there are? Her face lit up. Did it? Would you take me? I'd love to, I smiled. We just have to convince your parents. They'll agree, she said confidently, especially if you pay. We both laughed, and there was more sincerity in that laugh than in any conversation I'd had with my family in years. When Edith left, I was alone in the quiet house. But for the first time in a long time, that silence didn't seem lonely or sad. It was filled with possibilities, plans, dreams. I sat down in Percy's chair and looked at his picture. You were right, old boy, I said aloud. It's never too late to start living for real. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I felt that he would have approved of my decisions. He had always wanted more for me than just the role of mother and grandmother, than endless work and sacrifice. He wanted me to be happy. Tomorrow I will go to the travel agency and buy a ticket to Venice. I will drink coffee in Piazza San Marco and ride a gondola down the Grand Canal. I will paint watercolors of the views of the city that Percy and I have longed to see. I am no longer an ATM machine. I am Violet Thornbridge, a woman whose life is just beginning. From my purse came the sound of a message. It was Edith. Thank you for today, Grandma. I'm proud of you. I smiled, feeling warmth spill into my chest. Maybe I wasn't completely alone after all. And maybe not all family ties are irretrievably broken. Some, the most important ones, are only growing stronger. It was getting dusk outside the window, but there was a new day ahead, a new chapter, a new life. My life.